Good morning. My name is Mary Collins, and I am the curator of the Scott Family Collection here at Alamance Community College. I just started as curator in October, but I've been with the collection for many years. Before I start, I would like to share a little quote from William Faulkner, the writer. He once said, "The past is never dead. It isn't even past." Let's see if you agree with this quote by the end of my talk today. The Scott Family Collection is one of two special collections owned by the library at ACC. The other special collection consists of the Crystal Lee Sutton papers. Crystal Lee was a labor activist who was a nursing student here at ACC at one time. She decided to donate her papers to the school before she died. We were very lucky to get them. Often people leave their papers to much larger libraries such as UNC or NC State. But back to the Scott Collection. The Scott Family Collection is located in 316G Building. We are open on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 9 to 5. So you can come and visit, or you can visit us online. We have a website, a Facebook page, an Instagram account, and a series of educational videos on YouTube. So at this point, you might be thinking, well, who are the Scott family anyway, and why does ACC have a Scott Family Collection? Like many other families, the Scott family has lived in Alamance County since before there was an Alamance County. Before 1850, this area was in the western part of Orange County. Like many other families, the Scotts have contributed to the economy of this area and have been very active in public service. So far, the family has produced 2 governors, 2 commissioners of agriculture, 1 United States senator, and several members of the NC State Assembly. In addition, the family includes doctors and nurses who were trailblazers in their own right. But that is another story. Some of the businesses the Scott family has created are Melville Dairy, Melville Plastics, Alamance Foods, Scott Stone, and the TES Group, a company that provides staging for various events such as graduations and inaugurations. Now about our school. ACC has been around since the late 1950s and has changed its name a few times. In the 1970s, Governor Robert Scott and his aunt Elizabeth Carrington gave the land for the Graham campus of ACC, where we are now. There's a sign at the first entrance to the school with their names printed in big letters. After being governor, Robert Scott became the head of the community college system. He and his family have been very interested in ACC for generations and have served on the board of trustees. Governor Scott lived nearby and liked to visit ACC and talk with students. So about 20 years ago, the Scott family decided to donate objects of historical interest to the school. These items include furniture, portraits, photographs, letters, medals, farm items, and lots of other things. The very first item they gave us was a butter mold, a little wooden box for measuring and shaping butter made on their farm. The Scott family has been involved in dairy farming since the 1800s. But getting back to the collection, after a while there were so many objects, a portion of G Building was set aside for the collection. Now we have a gallery, an office, a workroom, and a storage closet for our work. So the goal of our collection, or any collection really, is to collect, preserve, interpret, and make available items of historical interest. We have a set of permanent displays, and we change out the temporary exhibits 2 or 3 times a year. Right now, we have a display of items connected to Kingstown, the mattress company that was started in Mebane by Arthur Neal Scott Sr. in 1904. Today, I'm going to share with you something about one of our items, a collection of letters that were written to and from a Confederate soldier named Currie Kerr. The Carrs and the Scotts have intermarried over the years. The letters were found in an attic near here and put up for auction at Leland Little in Hillsborough. As you may have guessed, Civil War items are highly collectible, even today. The previous curator, Peggy Boswell, attended the auction and had the winning bid. And so this is what these whole letters look like. They are written on various types of paper, sometimes ruled, that is, with lines, and sometimes not. At that time, the writer would have used a dip pen and a kind of ink called iron gall ink. This kind of ink was in use for more than 1,000 years until the fountain pen became popular in the late 1800s. So if you end up working with old documents, this is what they look like. They are typically written in a cursive style. So Currie Kerr was 29 years old when the Civil War broke out in 1861. He was excited about the newly formed Confederacy and was anxious to defend it. I'm sure he thought that the South would form its own nation apart from the North, where they could decide things for themselves. I don't think Currie or anyone else realized how long and brutal the war would turn out to be. Currie moved to Tennessee to stay with his sister's family until he could join a company called the Dancyville Grays. Here we see a photo of Currie. This is what old photos look like. Family lore says that he and his brother Willie look so much alike people had trouble telling them apart. So this is either Willie or Currie Kerr. On the right, we see a battle flag created for the Dancyville Grays. So this first letter was written on April 20th, 1861. Currie is excited about the coming conflict with the North and is writing to his cousin, Sam Murphy. He tells Sam of his plans to join a new company called the Dancyville Grays and asks Sam to join him. It turns out that Sam did not join Currie, and instead Sam moved to California and went into banking. By May 26, 1861, about a month later, the shine had worn off the whole idea of being a soldier, and Currie is missing his mother's cooking. He describes the food he is given as bacon, crackers, beans, potatoes, coffee, sugar, and rice. They had to give the soldiers hot coffee as the crackers were so hard you had to soak them before you could eat them. By 1 year later, in late April of 1862, Currie has survived the Battle of Shiloh, a major battle of the Civil War that took place on April 6 and 7, 1862, in southwestern Tennessee. Currie saw some horrendous things. There were, after all, 23,000 casualties, but he tries to reassure his mother that he will be okay. He says, "Don't be uneasy about me, Mother, but remember that the same God who brought me out of one battle safe still cares for me and protects me. Tell Anne and Mr. Thompson to write and direct to Dancyville. Ever your dutiful son, Currie." In October of 1862, Currie again survives, this time the Battle of Perryville in Kentucky, but he falls ill with pneumonia and is taken in by a local family, the Robinsons. Currie's mother, Jane Carr, receives an ominous letter from Dr. Rudisill, an Army doctor who tended to Currie and other soldiers. By this point, Kentucky had fallen to the Union, so the Robinsons rose above any partisan feeling they might have had and were just helping out a fellow human being. Dr. Rudisill does warn Mrs. Carr that Currie is dangerously ill. He has camp fever. His lungs are weak and were suffering, and I advised him that if he were to recover, he should resign and retire. By January of 1863, we learn from Currie's sister Lizzie that he has passed away. In a letter to her mother, she laments her brother's loss and finds comfort in her faith. You would think that Currie's story would be over at this point, but that turned out not to be the case. We believe that the two families, the Carrs and the Robinsons, corresponded with each other over the years. In 1901, 39 years after Currie's death, his sister Lizzie receives a letter regarding Currie's remains. And Mrs. Bogle is writing to see if Lizzie will approve moving Currie's remains to a cemetery in Danville, about 10 miles from where they lay. Apparently, Mrs. Bogle knew the Robinsons and had heard the story of the brave Captain Carr who died in the Robinsons' home. My dear Miss Carr, at a meeting of the Daughters of the Confederacy last week, it was proposed to remove the remains of your brother Captain Carr from the rather neglected spot where he lies in an old country churchyard to our beautiful cemetery here in Danville, where so many of his brave comrades lie, and place also a stone to mark the grave as on the other graves. Now I am writing to you to get your permission to do this. Lizzie gave her approval, and here we see a grave marker for Captain Carr in Bellevue Cemetery in Danville, Kentucky. Again, you would think that this story was long forgotten, but in 2018, 156 years after Currie's death, we see a newspaper article about Currie and the two families that cared about him. The article was published in the Advocate Messenger in Danville, Kentucky. For some reason, the story was unearthed by a genealogist and a reporter working together. So in the words of the novelist William Faulkner, we see that the past is never dead. It isn't even past. It's still being written about in 2018. Any questions?